The Sandy Cemeteries podcast is a MindGuard Media podcast in association with
Screw You, Todd
Productions.
Live in is ever changing. We can learn a lot from the dead. I'm Sandy Jean, your host, and this is Sandy Cemeteries, Tracing History. We'll learn about some of the oldest towns in the nation, as well as the interesting people who are buried there. Ready? Let's go. A few months ago in September, my husband Dave and I, along with our rescue dog Spike, decided to spend some time in the Rochester, New York area by Lake Ontario. The September before, we'd visited one of Rochester's most historic and beautiful cemeteries, Mount Hope, and visited the graves of Frederick Douglass, Susan B. Anthony, and Mr. and Mrs. White, a couple that I'd made a connection with on a paranormal investigation a couple of years before. We couldn't resist returning this time to do some more exploring and to learn more stories. We weren't disappointed. Situated on 196 acres of land adjacent to the University of Rochester on Mount Hope Avenue, the cemetery is the permanent resting place of over 350,000 people, with an additional 500 to 600 new burials each year. The long and winding roads take you up and down hills, into the woods, and you never really know just what you'll find. There are several well-known and prominent figures buried here, and just as many, if not more, silent heroes and people who lived what we'd call normal lives, but they all have a story to tell. When turning left off of Cedar Avenue in Mount Hope Cemetery onto Indian Trail Avenue, I noticed a grave on the corner of Section G. Little Mary was written on the stone. That's all. Little Mary. No date, no epitaph, just Little Mary. And mysteriously, there was a doll propped up against the stone. I asked Dave to stop the car and got out because I just felt compelled, drawn to this grave. I walked up to it and instantly felt sadness. And to be honest, I couldn't tell if I was picking up someone else's sadness or my own. To see a grave with the words Little Mary and a little china doll leaning against it made me wonder just who this Little Mary was. I quickly took a picture of the grave, touched the stone gently, and we moved on. We saw a lot of beauty that afternoon in September, learned a lot of new stories, and hopefully kept a lot of memories of the once living alive, if even for a moment. When we got home a few days later, Little Mary was still running through my head. Who was she? What happened to her? What is her story, and who left the doll at her grave? Well, if you know me, you know I don't give up. I immediately got to work on solving the mystery. Unfortunately, I couldn't find any stories or legends on Google about Little Mary. There was nothing. Okay, plan B. I checked findagrave.com, my absolute go-to. Not much there, so on to plan C. I studied my picture of the grave very carefully. Aha! There were other graves with names in the background. So back to Find a Grave I went. And lo and behold, I found Little Mary. Mary Smith Chapin was born on July 3rd, 1848 in Rochester. She passed away on November 23rd, 1849 at just 1 year old. Now, there's no explanation of her death given, but as you can imagine, given the time, a disease or health issue may have taken its toll on a young baby. Mary had 4 siblings, Edward, Louis, William, and Alice. All lived well into their adult years. Her parents were Louis and Rachel Chapin. Now, while I was unable to find much more information about little Mary, I was thrilled to at least have solved the mystery of who she was, and to have given her a name and a voice and a remembrance. But then I decided to dig a little bit further. Where did her family come from? Who were they? Did they have a story of their own? Back to findagrave.com it was. I was able to trace all the way back to Mary's great-great-great-great-great-grandfather. Yes, 5 greats. And what an interesting life he led. This gentleman's name was Deacon Samuel Chapin. And according to Find a Grave, he was born in 1598 in Paignton, Torbay Unitary Authority, Devon, England. He left his native England in 1635 to escape religious persecution. He settled for a time in Roxbury, Massachusetts, before moving his family and helping to found a site they called Agawam. 4 years later, Agawam was renamed Springfield, and Deacon Chapin became one of the leading men in the government of the town, and he held many public offices during his life, including selectman, auditor and magistrate, and he was deacon of the church. During his life, he became a symbol of the new country's religious founders. Over 2 centuries after his death, he was immortalized by master sculptor Augustus Saint-Gaudens in bronze with his work called The Puritan, an 8-foot, 7.5-inch, 1877 piece that can now be found in Springfield's Merrick Park to emphasize the piety and perhaps moral rigidity of the country's religious founders. This work was commissioned by Chester W. Chapin, a railroad tycoon, congressman, and Chapin descendant. Smaller variants of the work can be found in various museums, including the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, at City Hall Square, Philadelphia, and the Louvre in Paris, France. Samuel is an ancestor of many famous Americans, including President Grover Cleveland, President William Taft, financier John Pierpont Morgan, actor Spencer Tracy, and author-poet Harriet Beecher Stowe. A book was written about the life of Deacon Chapin, titled Life of Deacon Samuel Chapin of Springfield. Deacon Chapin died at the age of 77 in the year 1675. As you can see, it's so easy to go down the rabbit hole when exploring cemeteries and having the urge to keep memories alive, to tell stories, and to help these people live on. What started out as a simple return to a beautiful and historic cemetery turned into a journey of excitement, lots of new knowledge, and a true feeling of accomplishment. I challenge each of you to take a few minutes and learn about someone new, whether it's an ancestor, the result of a drive through a cemetery, or a random choice on a website. It's important that we keep their memories alive so that they can live on forever. It's important that we continue to trace history. Be sure to follow our Facebook page, The Sandy and Toddcast, for more information about upcoming episodes of Sandy's Cemeteries, Tracing History. Todd and I also have a brand new podcast called the Apothecary Podcast, and that has its own page as well. You can find that like that on Facebook. And make sure that you join our group, Stay Weirdos, Friends of the Sandy and Toddcast. It's a very safe space for thoughts, opinions, feelings, ideas, questions, non-judgmental, and everybody in there has a great time. Until next time, I'm Sandy Jean, and thank you again for joining me for Sandy's Cemeteries, Tracing History.